Hi everyone and welcome to another video. I'm Laura Macar and today I'm going to do a tag, specifically the Omnivore Reader tag, and it was created by Emma from A Cup of Books, and I'll link her video below. And I was tagged to do this one by Pauline from Dancing Lawn, whose video I will also link below. I like this tag because it's for readers who read across a bunch of different genres, and I am one of those people. I like to read different things, and in this tag you pick four genres, your four favorites or four you want to talk about, and then there are three questions to answer. First, what is your favorite book of that genre? What is the last book or the book that you are at that moment reading of that genre? And what is the next book you are going to be reading? So I have picked four genres, and I have decided I'm going to talk about historical fiction, about literary fiction, about non-fiction, and about fantasy/magic realism. So let's dive into the first one. So historical fiction. I really like historical fiction because I'm very curious and I like to learn about things that happen in other countries or at another time, but that still has a narrative, that still has a story, that still has characters that allow me to place people in that time into that place. So that's the reason I usually love historical fiction. And one of the historical fiction books that is one of my favorites is one that I read last year, and that is In the Shadow of the Banyan by Vaddey Ratner. It is set in Cambodia just after the Khmer Rouge, the communists, took over, and we follow a young girl who's part of a family as they are taken away from their home, and they go through all of the steps that dehumanizes people. So it's this young girl who loses her childhood, who sees her family being ripped apart, and I loved the writing in this one, and that is why I love that book. And the other favorite that I want to talk about is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This book is wonderful because it shows how what happened to one generation cycles through to the next, which cycles through to the next, which cycles through to the next. And we follow two strands of a family, two descendants of two half-sisters who are from Ghana. One of the sisters is put upon a slave ship and is brought to the US, and the other remains in Ghana. And every chapter we see one of their descendants. So the daughter of the son of one of the half-sisters and the other, and then the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. It's wonderfully done. And even though sometimes you want to learn more about the characters because you become invested in them, I still think that what it does very well is showing what the red line is of these lives, of the effect of having three generations before you, having someone that was in slavery, and etc., etc. So I highly recommend this one. So the last book that I read that is historical fiction, I finished yesterday for the Invisible Cities project, and it is Palace Walk by Naguib Mahfouz, and it's set in Egypt just after the First World War, and we meet a family that lives in Cairo, and the father is tyrannical, and we see this family evolve where the daughters are married off, the sons are very afraid of their father, etc., etc. And we see this life in Cairo at the time, and the Egyptians also wanting to break free from the British rule. The next one I'm going to read, so I looked a bit at the books that I'm planning to read also for Invisible Cities, but I didn't get the impression there was a lot of real historical fiction in there. But one that I really want to get to, that I got last year, is Les Cagots d'Aquitaine by Madeleine Mansiet-Berthaud, and this is set in the 17th century, and it's about a group of people that apparently get discriminated. It's about a group of people called les cagots, and the cagots are apparently a society that are discriminated. So I really want to get to this also because I think that it's going to be a fast read. These are three books in one, and it's big, so I'm excited to just spend a week reading this whole thing, but I haven't really taken the time yet, also because I think it's going to be a pleasurable experience to read it, but it's not going to be wonderful, if you understand what I mean. But yeah, I want to get to this one. Let's talk about the next genre, and that is literary fiction. And the books that I want to talk about for this genre are actually mostly classics. I seriously looked up the definition of the difference between literary fiction and contemporary fiction because I have a feeling about the difference, but I haven't ever had to put it into words or check whether my feeling was correct. And also what then was the difference with classics, but classics are just basically old books that people think are very important, and you can have classics that are literary fiction or that are fantasy, etc. So that means that the literary fiction, contemporary fiction is mostly plot-based, and literary fiction is mostly about characters. That was that difference. So my literary fiction that I want to talk about is mostly classics. And I think one of my favorites of all time is Germinal by Emile Zola. I've already talked about this book on this channel. It's set in France, in the north of France, and we see the mining world as people in the mining world start to revolt and want to be paid more because they are starving to death. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I love the way it's written. There's a lot of information. It is quite dense, but I loved how real this was. And yes, it's big, yes, it's French, yes, it's a bit intimidating, but love this book. And the last book that I've read that is literary fiction is actually from the same series. So this is from the Rougon-Macquart series, and the last book I read is also from the Rougon-Macquart series. There are 20 books, and I just recently finished reading L'Assommoir by Emile Zola, and actually I just finished reading this morning. It's also another biggie. The main character of this one, Gervaise Macquart, is actually the mother of Etienne Lantier, who is one of the main characters in this one. And this is set in Paris, and so Gervaise Macquart is a washing lady, I suppose you could say, une blanchisseuse, and she's very poor, and this book is about her life for about 20 years, her trying to break away from being poor in Paris and, not managing to do that. And it was a very difficult read, but I'll talk about that more in my wrap-up of the books that I read in February. And the book that I'd want to read soon is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoyevki. I've heard good things about this one, and again, I think it's quite intimidating. I've read The Brothers Karamazov, actually in a matching edition. Here it is, last year, and there is something dense and rich about this type of writing that I like, and I think The Idiot, this is about a man who, I think now we would call it autistic, or at least on the autism spectrum, but that was not how we talked about these kind of things at the time. So I'm really curious about this, and I'm honestly, one of the reasons I want to read this is so that I can then put it on my shelf with the other one, because look how pretty that's going to be. I think that's going to be very satisfying. So I want to read The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, but I don't know when I'll get to it, but I want to make time for it quickly. So maybe next month. I'll have to see when I make my TBR for next month. And I also want to get really quickly to Des Orientales by Negar Javadi. I got the idea to read this from Paula, who was very enthusiastic about this book, and I'll link the video in which she talks about it below. This is about an Iranian girl who moves to France when she is young, and about what it is to have these two identities. So I'm very excited to read this. I want to read it yesterday is basically how I feel about this book. So, next genre is nonfiction. So, nonfiction, I usually categorize memoirs and narrative nonfiction when I do my stats, where memoirs are based on someone's life and narrative nonfiction is more about a random topic, but I decided to group them for this video. One of my favorite nonfiction is a book that I haven't talked about yet, I think, and it is The Choice by Edith Eger. This is a very powerful book. So it tells the story of Edith Eger, and she comes from Hungary or Bulgaria. I don't really remember exactly where she's from, but she was Jewish, a Jewish child when the Second World War broke out, and she's sent to Auschwitz. And so the first part of her book is her talking about her experience during the Second World War, where Auschwitz wasn't even the worst thing that happened, because she was taken away from Auschwitz before Auschwitz was liberated, and even the death marches that she was a part of, and how every day was horrendous. That was very impactful. But the second part is about how she afterwards, what she went through, how that affected her. She goes back to her hometown, and her and her sisters, I believe, survived, and she ends up marrying and going to the US. But all of the trauma that she has still has an impact on her, on how she treats her children, on sometimes how she's afraid to go outside. And so the second part of the book is first about how that trauma is impacting her life, and how she at one point deals with this trauma. And she then, I'm not really spoiling this, I think, because I think it's also on the back, but she then ends up becoming a psychologist, a psychiatrist even, I think. And then she talks about how she helps other people with trauma. It's a very, very good book. I think a lot of stories about the Second World War, histories, people's experiences, it kind of concentrates on the Second World War itself, and this one goes further. It talks also, it has this line that goes through. Talks about what happens afterwards, what it was for her children to have a mother that has had these experiences, and her then trying to use the things that she's learned, not necessarily during that, but by learning about trauma, to then help others. I think that was very well done. I absolutely love this book, and I need to reread it soon. I read it 2 years ago. But yeah, it's a very, very good book, and I highly recommend it. So the last non-fiction that I read, / the one that I'm reading now, is Stamped from the Beginning. I'm still reading this. I am over here, so I think I only have 1/5 left, because all of this is notes. And I have one of these left. It's very, very, very interesting, and it's about the history of racist ideas in the US. And it's by Ibram x Kendi, and I can highly recommend it already. It's definitely going to be a 5-star read. There is so much information, and this book shows me how much work there is to do to deconstruct your own racist ideas. But I'll talk about this more at another time. The next non-fiction I'm going to read, so there are 2 kind of options. I don't know which one I'll start with, but both are for the Invisible Cities project. And I'm either going to first read The Return by Hisham Matar, and that is about a man who goes to Libya in search for the history of the things that his father went through. And the other possibility is that I'm going to start with Iraq in 100+ stories, edited by Hassam Blassim. So those are short stories about Iraq, but I haven't looked into it more, except for knowing that that is going to be what I'm going to read for Iraq. Last genre, I have fantasy and magic realism. I don't read as much fantasy as I used to. I think it's one of the genres that really got me into reading when I was younger because of escapism, where now I'm veering more towards learning about things. But my favorite book of all time, when it comes to fantasy / magic realism, and really favorite book of all time, full stop, is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I reread this last year, and it's still wonderful. It's about a competition between 2 magicians' apprentices, and those apprentices are given some kind of world, a circus, in which they have to show that they are the best, and every thing that they do, it's like they're moving a pawn on a checkboard to try to show that no, they are the best. But they end up forming a link, and this book is about the consequences of having such a game in the real world, and about all of these people. And it's a wonderful book. It's a dream. I absolutely love it. A lot of people love this book, and I think if the hype were lesser, some people might pick it up that now don't pick it up because of the hype, if that makes sense. Anyway, love, love, love this book. The last fantasy / magic realism that I read is, I think, City of Brass by Chakraborty, which is the second book in the Devabad trilogy. It's either that one or I might have finished The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis later. I don't know. It's one of those two, and both are just fantasy in the magic-y sense, although Devabad is set in a Arabic world and Narnia is a very Christian based. And those two books also bring me to the last question. So the next book that I'm going to read, it's either going to be the third book of the Devabad trilogy, which is The Empire of Gold, or I might read The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis first, so that's the Chronicles of Narnia, or also for The Invisible Cities, I might pick up Love in Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I don't know which one of those three I'll start first, and I don't know which one of those three I am going to finish first, but all three I'm going to read this month, at least. So that's that about all of these genres. I hope you like this tag. I definitely loved making it and looking at all of my books again and talking about the choice, especially because I haven't talked about that one. And I would love it if you did the tag as well and hear you talk about different genres that you read of. And I would love to see this video made by Jyotsna from Jyotsna's Bookscapades, and also by my soulmate Paula, of course, by Droyo Books, and I would also love to see Ellie from All Grey Books do this one. I'll see you guys in another video.